November 13th of this year will mark the 10-year anniversary of the release of the very first Assassin's Creed game, and I wonder if anybody who bought the game on day one could have predicted the state that the franchise would be in today. It tends to be something I think about myself when I buy new IPs or games that are intended to revive aging franchises. I reckon that we will see a sequel to For Honor, and if it turns out to be successful, there probably will be more that follow. Tomb Raider was set to become a big hit once again to the next generation of gamers after its 2013 release, and its sequel in 2015 was received very well, so I assume that there will be another one coming soon. And I think many of us also thought long-awaited sequels for games like The Shadow of Mordor and The Last of Us would eventually release as well. In 10 years time from now, it will be interesting just to look back on the thoughts we had at the time and how they actually turned out in real life. I myself didn't play my first Assassin's Creed game until 2011, when the franchise at that time, in my opinion, was slowly on the decline. So I don't really know that feeling that players had when they first played the first Assassin's Creed game, or just their first play session in general. In the 10 years that Assassin's Creed has been on the shelves, there have been 9 main entries in the franchise. 9 main entries in 10 years sounds like a recipe for disaster, with 8 releasing in the last 8 years. But it seems that Ubisoft have finally come to terms with the state of the franchise by taking a year off from releasing a brand new game. Origins, for the most part, looks very good and has the potential to bring players back like myself with a nice refreshing time period for the franchise. Today, I want to briefly talk about what Ubisoft did to Assassin's Creed in the last 10 years, and touch upon important aspects that might make Origins the birth of a new era for Assassin's Creed, and not the final nail in the coffin. When Assassin's Creed first released in 2007, it was considered by many a disappointment when you consider the hype and promises it had leading up to its launch. The very restrictive and lonely open world, the lack of variety missions had in place, and characters that weren't fleshed out very well. As for many other popular franchises like Halo, Mass Effect and the Batman Arkham games, that seemed to have their first entry as a massive success. It wasn't the case so much though for Assassin's Creed, but it was just a baby step for Ubisoft, which then led them in 2009 when they released not only my favourite Assassin's Creed game, but what I think is one of the best games of the 7th generation.
Oh, Ezio Auditore! I didn't expect to see you again. What with all that's happened. Where are my manners? Welcome back.
To sum up why I think Assassin's Creed 2 was such a great game, it just seemed to get every piece of it right, improving from everything on the first game: characters, story, a wide variety of missions and side quests, fun collectibles, and an open world that felt alive. Even when I go back and play it now, it still feels like the best Assassin's Creed game. It felt like this was the one that Ubisoft took the most care of, and this is no nostalgia added. Unfortunately though, with its great success, it might have given Ubisoft the wrong idea on how they were to go about the future for the franchise. In the next 6 years from then, they would release 7 main entries. With Brotherhood and Revelations being good for the most part, they started to show that there was no innovative ideas and new ways for Assassin's Creed to feel any different. New features were introduced like replayable missions and multiplayer, but I would argue that while the games were good, they did start to feel like this type of behaviour from Ubisoft could soon get out of control. With Assassin's Creed 3 releasing in 2012, many fans after playing it were once again left underwhelmed with the final product. With the time period shifting to the American Revolution, many of us fans expected a new breath of fresh air for the franchise. Aside from the game having great graphics, a nice new true running mechanic and combat abilities, everything else that would make those aspects of the game matter weren't there. An inconsistent plot, bugs and glitches, and a dull protagonist. These things brought Assassin's Creed 3 down, but it did give us a taste of naval combat at times in the game, and it felt so refreshing and welcome. But those missions were a very small portion of the game, but it did inspire Ubisoft to make their next game in the next year. While Black Flag does step away from the Assassin's story and more of a Pirates of the Caribbean video game, it seemed to just retain some of that momentum that Ubisoft left behind back in Assassin's Creed 2. a much better protagonist, a beautiful vast open world, great characters, and collectibles. The naval combat, which this time around was a large portion of the game, didn't seem to overstay its welcome in the game. Unlike in a game like Batman Arkham Knight, where it was cool to finally be able to play the Batmobile, but it was used far too much throughout its story, and that makes it lose all of its excitement and motivation in playing in it. But in Black Flag there was many different approaches that you could take when taking control of your ship, and sections that would test your skill as you progressed further into the story. Black Flag, in my opinion, was a step in the right direction, but like I said earlier, positive reception motivated Ubisoft to not just stop there, in fact encouraging them that they could go on and release 2 games in the same year.
Looks fine. Of course it does.
In 2014, Rogue and Unity released on the same day. Rogue was for past gen players and Unity for the current gen players. Both games tended to fly very much under the gamer's radar, with Rogue having absolutely no promotion leading up to its launch, gave players little reason to even care for it. Though I've played it for myself, and actually it's not as bad as I would have thought. It just seemed so out of place, and nothing more than an attempt to make an extra buck. Meanwhile, Unity didn't fare much better, despite having all of the promotion leading up to its launch, the lack of polish the game had, and the microtransactions that were added. The story and characters were mediocre at best. Graphics were great, but many would agree that this was a low point for the franchise, and when I felt Ubisoft were treating the Assassin's Creed games like the sports games. Microsoft's Forza, Activision's Call of Duty, pushing a game out year after year with little care of changing. With the poor reception and overall negative reviews from the community, I would have hoped that Ubisoft would have finally realised and taken a break from the franchise, but they didn't. In 2015, they released Syndicate. Syndicate was set to be a more story-focused game, hoping to address many of the issues that Unity had. Whilst I look at Syndicate like Unity but with more polish and a female protagonist, it fails once again to feel like a standout, and the reception once again didn't fare much better than Unity. Here is all of the average reception scores out of 100 that many of the gaming companies like IGN and GameStop gave the main titles in Assassin's Creed. You can see that Black Flag seems to be the last big hit for the Assassin's Creed, with many of the recent ones struggling to push over 80. It was only after releasing Syndicate when Ubisoft realised the constant decline that the franchise was receiving game after game finally gave them the idea that they should take a year off. So if Origins ends up being really good, will Ubisoft feel that same way they did with Black Flag and just feel like they can do it again the year after that? And just release another Assassin's Creed year after year? So let me end this video by expressing my conclusion and posing a few questions to you guys. How can Ubisoft retain the positive reception it once had with Assassin's Creed 2 and Black Flag? Despite Origins is looking like a nice new refreshing skin covered over, it's what's underneath that will matter. It's Assassin's Creed. We all know what to expect by now. Those empowering feelings we had when we did our first eagle jump and our first assassination from up high have faded away because of their overstayed welcome. Origins needs to be more than just Assassin's Creed in ancient Egypt. It needs to show some new innovation and creativity, while still retaining that Assassin's Creed formula that we all know. And if Assassin's Creed Origins ends up being everything we wanted it to be and scores high reviews, what does that mean for the franchise after that? Should Ubisoft just go back to releasing yearly games and we just have to hope for the best? I personally think that no matter how Origins turns out, Ubisoft need to slow down on production deadlines and focus on quality and not quantity. We all have specific games that offer different experiences, but if developers go as far as to release a game every single year, it makes us consumers feel pressured, and all that does is ruin things that were once great. For example, I love Titanfall 2. For the reason because it offers a completely different FPS experience that no other FPS can match at this point. But if at some point we get to a Titanfall 5, that formula, whilst it still may be fun, at that point it feels too familiar and it will lose all of its excitement. The point I'm trying to put across to you guys is that when developers release a sequel to its original, that instantly divides the community of the franchise. And the more games they release, the more cuts they're making. And at some point, they release another game, at that point, it's impossible to satisfy everybody in the community. I hope Origins turns out great. We've got to just hope that Ubisoft don't get the wrong idea again, like they did after releasing Assassin's Creed 2. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you still play Assassin's Creed, or have you completely just ditched the franchise entirely? And tell me, what does Origins need to do to be the comeback for the franchise? As always, thank you for watching. Leave your likes and dislikes. I'll see you guys again soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.